to Moral Side of the News, our weekly discussion of today's top stories from a religious, ethical, and moral perspective. I'm Shawn Kaelin with the WHAS Crusade for Children. I'm joined today, as always, by a distinguished panel of religious leaders. Reverend Clay Calloway, West Louisville Ministers Coalition. Reverend Dr. George Wasson, Faithpoint Church. Father Tony Smith, Archdiocese of Louisville. And Richard Uhler, retired U.S. Army chaplain. We begin this week with the crash landing of Delta Flight 4819 in Toronto on Monday.
Images tonight of that Delta jet crash at Toronto's Pearson Airport. Investigators are now reviewing this new video of Delta Flight 4819 making a hard landing on the right landing gear right there, erupting in flames and then thick black smoke. The plane then beginning to roll, those 80 passengers and crew inside. Those passengers hanging upside down by their seatbelts. The heroic flight crew helping them to get off that plane. All 80 people on board survived, at least 21 injured, 2 remaining hospitalized tonight. But with the careful guidance from that 4-member flight crew, this was a miracle that everyone survived.
Tonight, this stunning new video showing the moment that Delta Airlines flight crash landed in Toronto. Investigators now reviewing the images. Its landing gear appearing to collapse. The right wing striking the ground, sparking flames, the plane flipping onto its back. A cloud of black smoke rising into the air.
We hit the runway extremely hard and we kind of popped up and it felt like we were leaning to the left. There was a giant firewall down the side. I could actually feel the heat through the glass. And then we were going sideways. I'm not even sure how many times we tumbled, but we ended upside down. I was hanging there in my seatbelt upside down.
Passenger John Nelson describing the harrowing moments inside, suspended by his seatbelt. At this point now, you're literally hanging upside down on this plane.
I didn't want to hit my head. I wanted to make sure, I could stay safe as much as I could and just hold on and hope that we made it through that.
Everything, drop it!
Flight attendants
Come on.
seen standing on the ceiling of the plane, helping passengers scrambling to escape. Nelson shooting this video moments after the crash.
Toronto. We just landed. Our plane crashed. It's upside down. Fire department's on site.
So panel, we bring it out to you all, and really the anchor in the intro there used the word miracle. A lot of folks are using the word miracle, divine intervention. Perfect topic for this show, especially 80 survivors of that crash.
Divine intervention or happenstance, however you want to say it, but it's a good thing that happened. If they had flipped to the other side or so, if those wings had stayed on. My understanding is the fuel is packaged in the wings. That's where the fuel is for a lot of them. So if the wings had not come off of that thing, it could have been a different scenario. Totally.
Could have been an explosion.
So, yeah, totally. So.
Well, I mean, you could call it a miracle. I mean, it's a miracle. We wake up every day. So I'll narrow it down to that, lowest common denominator. It clearly was a great thing that we had so many survivors in the midst of a terrible tragedy. That is the brightest side of this whole incident in Toronto. They survived. They had some injuries, but they survived. So thank God for that. There's a reason they tell you to buckle your seatbelts. They were literally saved by the seatbelts. Suspended by the seatbelts that many people argue about whether they have to buckle them or not. So that is what actually saved their life. So it's amazing that when things like this occur, which is seemingly rare, then it's those seatbelts that really come through when you need them.
Yeah, it's my understanding they told the folks not to release those until the steward, the crew had checked to make sure.
They checked them.
Right. Then they began to let them loose.
Swept through.
That's, again, like you say, being held up there, I guess, is very uncomfortable, but certainly it did probably save their lives.
One thing that's remarkable, it's kind of outside the story, but it is a story, is that we've been getting so many reports of plane crashes, plane incidents. Of course, the situation in Baltimore, we had, just on and on. We get these plane-related stories that are popping up, and I've later heard that plane incidents happen, from time to time, but not with the rapidity that we're seeing it reported in the news right now. And someone has argued that, when they do happen, we don't always get the news report of them when they happen that way. But because the news cycles happens this way with algorithms, once you have one incident, then it automatically brings up other incidents. So we get the impression like Chicken Little, the sky is falling, when it happens. I mean, they don't happen with the frequency of a car wreck or a train wreck. I mean, a car wreck rather, that happens all the time that people die from. But the fact that we're getting these stories so in rapid succession says as much about the way news algorithms work as much as anything.
I reached out to a member of my church who's a pilot, and I said, so talk to me a little bit about this, about we do seem to be having all of these incidences happening so frequently right now. And he said, interesting, back in the 90s, there was a group of aviation people who got together, and one of the presentations that was made by an executive said, we're quickly reaching the point in time where we are going to potentially have a major catastrophe once a week going from here on out. And my member said, the really good news is that we have made such drastic improvements in infrastructure, in safety protocols, in design that never came to fruition. And so the reality is, while we do seem to be seeing many of them, it's not really so much out of the ordinary. And I think that's good news for us, because I think what we have a tendency to do as people is to get ahead of the story, to start blaming, to start looking at, well, certainly it must have been caused because of, and postulating, why these things would happen, when the reality is, he said it takes about 6 months of investigative work to really figure out what happened. And so for me, it's just, it serves as a remembrance to me and a reminder that let's just not get out ahead of the story, start the blame game, start accusing people of not doing their jobs and those kinds of things, because we don't really know. And we should, as ministry leaders, we should be the ones who are that voice of temperance, right? That voice of, let's just wait, let's see how this rolls out. We're not the professionals, they are. Let's let them do their work, and then let's see what happens.
Yeah, and I was reading up a lot of things about this too, and I came across an article. It was interviews of pilots and Business Insider, what pilots could say have caused the plane to go belly up. And it says, right landing gear collapse on touchdown.
Which is what happened here.
Yeah, yeah. Wind shear could have compromised the landing gear coming from that direction. The winds were like 40 miles an hour. Right. Or there could be if a cracking was missed during a maintenance check. But the last one I thought was interesting, because of the fact that it is snow and ice up there in Toronto, like it is down here at this time. But there was snow and ice there, but one remarked, hitting an ice block at 150 miles an hour could certainly cause failure. So, at this point, you can't blame somebody for it until we find out the complete investigation.
Right.
And find out, what really happened. And frequency, there's frequencies, there's been plane crashes a lot over the years. Just go into the search and you'll find tons of them. Did some happen last year? Yes. Did some happen 30 years ago? Yes, they did. And could we say the same blame game in the mid-90s? Possibly, but no. Of course it didn't. You don't blame an administration for it. You say, all right, was it mechanical? Was it some other external situation? Like we said in the one where we were talking about the one from D.C. a few weeks ago, it's tragic, yes, it is, and we have to look at it from that perspective. Yeah.
And there's various factors. I'm not meaning to interrupt you, but I remember one locally, relatively local, that occurred in Lexington. Remember about 10 years ago?
Yes, it was maybe a little bit longer than that, but yeah.
Yeah, but that range,
15,
okay.
2006, I think.
But it was big national news, and I think it involved human error.
They took off from the wrong runway.
Right. Okay. Anytime you have a human being involved in anything, then that's a possible an opportunity for something to go wrong. But I mean, it happens. I mean, it's sad, but in this case, we're so glad that there was no loss of life.
Indeed, indeed.
That's the good news. That's the real story in this story.
Right, and I would go with you on that because of the goodness of the life being saved. If we had more stories of plane crashes, whatever, where people survived, and you see a little bit about that. Some of the smaller planes, the ones who land, crash on the runways or crash on the interstates, whatever you see those little small planes. And they say everyone walked away from it. At least this is the goodness of what we're hearing on this story too, that there was no loss of life.
And this could be something similar to what happened with Sullenberger when he landed it in the Hudson River.
The Hudson River, that was another famous. Now, some people have always looked for opportunities to blame, so we ended up blaming error there. And of course, you have people on the right and left just talking about this. Of course, it was not lost on some commentator talking about when the right wing broke, that the plane went belly up. But the good news is that people survived. So some can make part out of that. But again, I think there's real stories that we had 100% survival rate of this very tragic incident.
One interesting component that I found was that it's probably the first time we've had a crash where people have been exiting the plane with their cell phones rolling.
Oh, right.
It's crazy to think that someone's first reaction was to, let's record this. I just survived a very impactful crash, and I'm going to get my phone out and record. It just
that speaks to the times also.
And media can latch onto that so quickly. And I think that's one of the, it's probably both the curse and the blessing of social media and some of these things is that now we all carry our cameras with us. And fast, immediate access to get on the media and to get stories out there. And again, I think we just want to make sure that we're just really making sure we tell the whole story and the complete story, right? Because we don't want to get into that place of blame, especially when we don't really know what happened yet.
Indeed. Yeah.
Very good. Great discussion. Let's move on to turn to Russia and Ukraine now, which has been a big world story this week, and the developments and the negotiations to end the war.
This morning, President Trump intent on reframing the war in Ukraine. After falsely blaming Ukrainian President Zelensky for the Russian invasion, Trump now labeling the U.S. ally a dictator.
A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left.
But Trump using no such label for Russian President Putin, who has targeted his political opponents and overseen Russian elections widely criticized as neither free nor fair. Zelensky, the former comedian turned wartime president, won by a landslide in 2019. He's polling over 50%, but has been unable under the Ukrainian constitution to hold elections while the war rages on and the country remains under martial law. Zelensky accusing Trump of spreading Russian disinformation and Kremlin talking points. Saying President Trump unfortunately lives in this disinformation space. Trump's comments sending shockwaves through Europe. The German chancellor saying it is simply wrong and dangerous to deny President Zelensky democratic legitimacy. The intense public back and forth began when Trump falsely claimed that Ukraine started the war. But it was Putin that invaded Ukraine 3 years ago, Russian troops storming across the border. All this coming as Trump has been excluding Ukraine from negotiations to end the war. Putin relishing the reopening of relations between the U.S. and Russia after a 5-hour meeting between senior Russian and American officials without any Ukrainian representation. Putin praising Trump, saying the talks have gone well and that he would like to meet with the American president. But back in Washington, some Republicans aren't so welcoming of this new thaw in relations, though most have stopped short of directly criticizing Trump.
Vladimir Putin is a gangster. He's a gangster with a black heart. He makes Jeffrey Dahmer look like Mother Teresa.
Democrats are sounding the alarm.
It's a really disturbing day because it will have impacts on international security and on the security of the United States, full stop.
So, panel, we come out to you. It's a significant change in the United States policy towards Ukraine in this war. And I just throw out at the beginning of the conversation, what are the moral, ethical components to having a conversation to end a war, but not inviting one of the other countries to participate in the conversation? Seems crazy to me.
Well, that speaks volumes. we would just use the word blame in our previous conversation, and that blame was the word used in that news clip. So we have the blamer in chief in the midst of this bizarre episode with Ukraine and Russia. So we have an elected official, Donald Trump, who's a rancid, unrepentant criminal that was elected to be the president of the United States. And when you have someone of that stroke and that ilk who is calling the shots, then it's no surprise that you would get all kind of strange, bizarre bents on morality that leave your head spinning. And for him to turn around and blame and call Zelensky a dictator is just off the rail. And we all know, even some members of his own party know who Putin is. And you give nothing but warm, fuzzy words for him, but you're going to level that attack on the president of Ukraine. It's just bizarre, and it's just it's sad that it's par for the course coming out of the mouth of this president, but it is just shows us how there's been a complete reversal of a destruction of our moral compass with respect to the leadership of this country.
So I guess I would take a different stance on that, is that I don't see this necessarily as a dramatic shift in the moral compass of our country. The reality is we have a war that has been going on for 3 years. We have a war that the United States of America has funded to the tune of $350 billion. We have a war where there's $100 billion missing. No accountability whatsoever. Neither one of these actors in this war are persons that we would lift up and say, yes, we want our kids to grow up and be just like them, right? And so I think for us, similarly to the airline thing, for us to get ahead of the conversation, like, do we really think that we get all the information about the conversation that happens between our president and Putin, and between our president and Zelensky? Well, of course not, because there are negotiations that are going on between secretaries of state, between officials, those kinds of things. And again, I'm looking at this saying, something's got to give. Conversations with them together, conversations with them apart. There's no way that we are getting the full and complete story. But what we can say is something's got to be done. Millions of people have died or are dying. This country is in ruins. What is the solution to this? I don't know the solution. That's why we have state officials and governmental officials, federal officials, who I have to put my trust in to say, I believe that you want the best, and we're going to try to come up with the best solution. But you know, when we say we're taking a dramatically different perspective of the Ukraine, well, the Ukraine is not exactly a moral compass country that we would look at. It has been reported that it's been a corrupt nation, I don't know how long. And so, again, I just want to be careful, because I don't want to be calling names to our president. I don't want to be calling names actually to any of the persons in this. I want the solution. I want us to come up with a way to fix this.
Remember what St. Paul said in Romans: you cannot do evil no matter how much good comes about. Some people would say what's happening in this regard with Ukraine and our president, whatever like that, because that's your issue. What's the morality of what's going on here? Since the medieval times, we've, not just for the United States, but any country, like every person has a right to defend itself when it's attacked. And those who can support, there's an obligation there in a sense of supporting too. I've listened, your comments about this, that, and the other 150 million, all stuff. Again, it depends on where you get your information from. And the key to this, in my perspective, is who do you trust? And we have a president, or whatever you want to say it, but I mean, he's lost the trust of about 50% of the country, and even Congress now. So is the trust there when you have a situation where you have two warring parties and one is excluded? That immediately, in my mindset, says that the trust issue is being violated here. how can you set up something that's going to bring about an end to the conflict of millions of people? Yes, people die. Look at what's happening in Africa right now. We're not that concerned about Africa, but people are dying like in droves. I mean, thousands of people a day over there, different countries. Just reported recently, I forget which country it was, but the rebels took over the city, and they're doing some little cleansing on over there. Is that in the news? No, it's Ukraine. But you also have the other side of the coin too, when you hear stories which have been verified, that Zelensky refused to sign an agreement allowing the U.S. to have 50% of its, I forget how, 50% of its special earth, or what do you call that? Special
mineral
minerals,
rights.
right? And he, as President Zelensky said over there, I'm not going to sign something of that nature. Is this, the trust aspect comes to place then, is this response we're hearing now a result of that refusal? Or because, the deal breaker and his history, the president, his history in corporate world, et cetera, sets up situations where he gets what he wants done, when he wants it done. And some of the world leaders are seeing the same thing in regards to international relationships. His comment during the elections and all this good stuff, again, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, either one. But the European leadership, as world leadership, is laughing at our country. They're not laughing now, but they're scared. I won't say the word on TV, because of what's possibly happening there. So to me, it's what I can see some of your comments there, but my tack would be a little bit different too. You have to be able to have trust in your leadership. And with everything happening in the first 100 days or whatever it is nature, it is, look at the news, for someone who won the election 1.5% of the vote, it's not a mandate, as he's saying, and it's also what's coming out from the executive, which seems to be overriding the legislative and even possibly the judiciary. That can be seen, and when it comes to, we're talking about Ukraine, that can be seen as really an attack on the trust that we could have in this administration.
Well, I think when we talked several months ago about how things were going with that, and I was asked, well, what's the answer to this? And I said, ceasefire. We need to save more lives instead of, continually bombarding each other. But yeah, the president probably did use a bad choice of words. I would say that, but but Ukraine is still trying to continue to be a sovereign country. Right. And we have to fit on their side, but is it to the tune of $350 billion? Hard to say. Now, 3 years ago, when things were just getting started, it started in February of 2022, and Biden had a phone call with Zelensky after the Congress approved the $1 billion aid back in June of 22, and he says, "So we're going to give you this," but he apparently got annoyed by the fact that Zelensky was saying, "Yeah, but I need this, 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 and this, and this," and there's always going to be need. How much are we supposed to contribute when we have problems of our own here? So I kind of have difficulty both ways. Yes, we need to support a sovereign country who's being overrun by someone who is considered a dictator and wants to get the Soviet Union back together again like it was. I think that's what the plan is.
Well, one thing, if I might just interject just real quick, there's a wrong way to do right, but never a right way to do wrong. And you mentioned being trustworthy. This president, this new administration is not trustworthy. Jesus said, a tree by the fruit it bears. Here you have a criminal who is running things for this nation. And he has a long, long recorded record of not being trustworthy. So in this case, for him to accuse and to call the president of Ukraine a dictator, and we know the long history of Putin, even members of his own party have called him out. So you have to be able to call balls and strikes on this. And to reward, it appears that he's rewarding Russia with, in effect, saying, even though you came and you took the land and you invaded them first, they started accusing Ukraine of starting the war. We know that's not true. And allowing Putin to keep all the land he got, and saying that he doesn't have to give it back because he's lost blood of the soldiers that took the war, took the land. The whole thing misses the mark when it comes to what's right and what's wrong in terms of having a moral compass. So, but clearly, in this particular case, this president has clearly missed the mark when it comes to calling balls like that. It lacks wisdom and it lacks compassion, his decision on this particular issue. I know this talk costs a lot of money, but let's just say you close the purse up, but still there's a right and wrong to this. He has missed the mark by a mile.
But again, don't you think that in part is because depending on who we listen to and where we get our information from, we don't know the negotiations that are going on between...
But I know what came out of the mouth of Trump.
Right, in that
I know
instance.
what came out of his mouth.
In that instance, but we've all said things that we wish that we hadn't have said, right? Lots of times. But I want to look at this and say, sometimes when I'm working with with persons who are in conflict with one another, I have to separate them. And so I'm going to have a conversation with you, and I'm going to have a conversation with you. I might bring them to the table together at some point, but I need to have some different conversations. Maybe part of the conversation that we don't know about is President Trump going to Putin and said, "You got to stop. You got to end this." We don't know that. We're making assumptions that we know that, but we don't know that.
Well, we don't know a lot of things about it, but you don't, when you separate your couples, you don't badmouth one of the individuals.
Right.
Which is what we're doing. My bottom line for me is I'm looking at a student of history. We have some Chamberlain effect going on here. In other words, keep him happy, we'll give him this part of the land, whatever. The same thing happened in the 30s, and again, as Santana said, if we don't learn from history, we're going to repeat it, and I'm beginning to see a lot of repetitions, if you study history, about what's happening in the 30s. It's starting to happen here.
There was a famous Russian czar back in the 1500s called Ivan the Terrible. So I think that Donald is gaining his own description, Donald the Despicable, with some of the things he's doing, the way he's doing it. And so it lacks wisdom. There could be some rhyme or reason behind it, but you know a tree by the fruit it bears, and the fruit he's been bearing to date has been very, very disconcerting.
Biden did tell Zelensky when he wanted more and more and more that he should show a little more gratitude. He did say that, and yeah, if you bring both people together and they start saying, no, I don't want to do this, nothing's going to get accomplished.
Good point. We'll have to end it there this week. Thanks for the very good discussion, and this story is not going away. We'll continue to follow it here on the Moral Side of the News. Thanks for watching and listening today. Thanks to our panel, Reverend Clay Calloway, West Louisville Ministers Coalition, Reverend Dr. George Wasson, Faithpoint Church, Father Tony Smith, Archdiocese of Louisville, and Richard Uhler, retired U.S. Army chaplain. Thanks for watching and listening to The Moral Side this week. Catch us again next week for an all-new Moral Side of the News.